The coronavirus pandemic has caused nearly all of Ukraine to shut down, with strict travel restrictions in place around the country. Ukraine's current coronavirus status is still under 30 confirmed cases, with 3 in the capital city of Kyiv, including an MP and his wife, and 3 deaths registered in the country so far. Though, in good news, there has been 1 confirmed case of recovery from the virus. The government's taken the opportunity to introduce a raft of new measures ostensibly aimed at combating the pandemic in the aptly named coronavirus bill. But how much will these measures really help? Welcome to Hromadski's Weekly Wrap-Up. I'm Romy Kokratsky.
And I'm Maria Romanenko.
Maria, are you sitting at least 2 meters away from me?
I think you need to move, Romeo.
We're here at the Hromadsky studio in Kyiv, Ukraine today to discuss the government's efforts in fighting coronavirus.
Joining us over Skype are 2 experts in their field. First up is the former Deputy Health Minister of Ukraine and now First Deputy Director General of the Outbreak Clinic, Alexander Lychevsky, who's here to talk about the preparation the government implemented, and later we'll be joined by Eugene Krapivin, a lawyer who will help us understand the more legal aspects of the coronavirus bill. Hello, Alexander. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening.
So first thing I wanted to ask is a lot of people in Ukraine, they're not sure how to react to the coronavirus outbreak. Some people are panicking, some are not, some are taking measures, some are saying it's all a hoax. What's the right reaction in this situation?
What does mean right reaction? So first of all, we should understand that these measures, we really need them. It's not really a good idea to compare a different healthcare system and just to copy-paste the reaction in other countries. So Ukrainian healthcare system is different from European one or from South Korea. That's why it seems to us that measures, quarantine, it's absolutely justified, and we should follow the social distancing. We should wash our hands. We should avoid unnecessary contacts, and because it really works. So expert field really agree with that. At the same time, we don't understand and we disagree with some unprofessional step in these measures. For example, Ukrainian borders were still open until this week. So the quarantine has already started. At the same time, the borders were open. So it's there is no logic in this measure.
Now, Alexander, what about the Kyiv metro? Because that feels like that had the biggest impact on Kyiv life, and a lot of people still have to travel to work 5 days a week, so they resort to taking trams and buses that have now become overcrowded. Do you think it was necessary to close the metro?
Very good question. So theoretically, we should close the metro. But at the same time, we didn't shut down any businesses, any life in Kyiv, and people still need to go to work. So a lot of people are contacting in a bus, in a different way of transportation, in a tram, in trolleybus, and there is no logic just to close the metro without closing businesses and other social life.
Ukraine has 30 confirmed.
Particular field in this one.
Alexandra, are you here?
Sorry?
You're breaking up a little bit. We missed part of your question, but I wanted to ask, Ukraine officially has 30 confirmed cases. but Ukraine is also among some of the least tested countries. Do you think
yes,
that...
I'm here.
Can you hear me, Alexander? I think we may need to try and call you again, because it's breaking up a little bit, unless you can hear me now.
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me now?
Right now, yes, but I missed you.
Ukraine officially has 30 confirmed cases, but a lot of people argue that the actual number is a lot higher because Ukraine is among some of the least tested countries. What do you think there's truth in this statements that the actual number is higher?
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is another fault of Ukrainian government. We still have no testing system for PCR testing. So we don't know the real situation. We have no PCR test systems, and also as a physicians, as a hospitals, we have no personal protect equipment. Absolutely. Can you hear me?
A little bit. Sometimes we can, sometimes we cannot. But another thing I wanted to ask, you have given some assessment of the actions of the government, but you were part of the previous health ministry under Irina Venediktova. So what's the general reaction? How do you think this health ministry is doing in response to the coronavirus outbreak?
Obviously, as a great picture, we can see some. So we see the very expert power is not sufficient in this ministry. And also, we can see some lack of proactive position, some lack of leading in reaction of the pandemics.
Okay, and what's your prognosis of how things are going to develop in Ukraine? With these strict measures already in place, do you think Ukraine will actually manage to contain the number of cases to what we have now, or slightly bigger, but not grow to a full-on outbreak?
The good news is Ukrainian physicians are trained by years to work without government support. And up to my knowledge, a lot of my colleagues are currently preparing to pandemics. We change our work days. We find somehow we find ways to transport medics to the hospital. We learn Chinese and Italian experience to be prepared to fight.
And in the clinic that you work in Outbreak, did you have any suspected cases? Did you have to personally take your doctors working for your clinic? Did they have to personally work for in response to this outbreak?
Not yet, fortunately. However, we have already prepared the plan B. If the large pandemic starts, we are ready to fight, and we have a plan B how to reform the clinic, how to admit some number of patients with a need of respiratory support, how to reorganize the schedule of physician, predominantly anesthesiologists, and ICU-related personnel. So we are ready. We have some reserve of medication, of disposals. So we are ready to fight, as well as a lot of my colleagues in state clinics.
Okay, thank you so much, Alexander. That was Alexander Livchensky, the former Deputy Health Minister of Ukraine. And Alexander, And Alexander told about the measure that his clinic is taking in preparation. They are preparing a plan B. He also talked about he gave us his assessment of the actions of the current health ministry. We have to remember that Alexander Lichevsky was part of Uliana Seprun health ministry. So we're very thankful for these insights. And now we're gonna go on to our second guest, Eugene Krapivin.
It does seem that we would have to wait a couple of minutes for that call to go through. With all of the coronavirus restrictions in place, we are holding all of our guests over Skype. And of course, that does result in some technical delays. But Maria, more to the point, one of the things that the former deputy minister mentioned is that he believed that some of the steps that the government had taken were unprofessional, to say. I know part of his broadcast there cut out, but what do you think he could have been referring to there?
Well, he explained that he meant that Ukraine should have closed its borders sooner, that Ukraine should have closed its borders sooner because it was like there was no reason to, take some measures without closing the borders first. And he also said a right point that a lot of people still have to go to work. So, without closing all the companies in Kiev, shutting down the biggest transport system in Ukraine, which is the Kiev Metro that carries 1.3 million passengers every day, it was maybe a little bit illogical, at least in his assessment. But let's hear what Eugene Krapivin says. I think he's already with us.
Yeah, so now joining over Skype is Eugene Krapivin. He is a lawyer for the Center for Policy and Liberal Reform. Eugene, thank you for joining us. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I'm hearing you.
Fantastic. Now, I'd like to start off by asking about the coronavirus bill, specifically the legal aspects. In this case, commentators were talking about the fines that are set in this bill for violating the quarantine, and some have suggested that these fines are unconstitutional. What's your assessment here?
I think that these fines are really big and they unproportional for another offenses that we have in Code of Administrative Offense. So it's near 500 euro from to more than 1,000 euro, and it's really very unproportional fine for Ukrainian legislation. But what government says as a position these fines as an extraordinary measure that is necessary to fight coronavirus and to ensure that quarantine will as for me, I think that it's not unconstitutional. But the pandemic ended, I think that we should reduce this as an extraordinary measure.
Now, another extraordinary measure that we had reports of the other day was a suggestion by Internal Affairs Minister Arsen Avakov and then supported by Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal, was to give Zelensky extraordinary powers to essentially declare a state of emergency without having to go for parliamentary approval. And a lot of people pointed out that this is obviously unconstitutional. Now, assuming that the government knows that that would be an unconstitutional move, what do you think could lead the government to declare such a step or even to say, well, we're considering this?
Well, I agree because the President of Ukraine does not have these powers, and to amend, to make amendments about this state of emergency, we should do not just change the law on state emergency, but also change the constitution. And we understand for all this procedure, we need a lot of time, and Parliament of Ukraine should gather not once, but twice, and the explanation that Denis Shmyhal, the Prime Minister of Ukraine, said that it is for the emergency situation when Verkhovna Rada will not able to gather. It's not a right explanation, because again, to make the amendments to the constitution, you need to gather twice, and without amendments to constitution, of course, it will be unconstitutional and will have very bad consequences. So I hope that it was just some unthinkable step from the prime minister, a part of some panic from the government, but it will not be the real bill, and it will not be registered in parliament as soon.
If a state of emergency is declared legally or illegally, let's say that legally by the procedure set on the Constitution, a state of emergency is declared. What kind of restrictions are we looking at for citizens? Is things like freedom of movement going to be restricted? Political activities? What can we expect?
It will not change a lot, because what we now have, it's some kind of quasi-state of emergency. So these measures, which are already adopted established by government, adopted by Verkhovna Rada, it's partly de facto a state of emergency. So if the state will pronounce it by the president with approval of Verkhovna Rada, it will be the same, but it can make some additional measures, like fully prohibition of peaceful gatherings, because now they just partly prohibited. And yes, it could be the prohibition for movement on the streets, like in Italy, when you cannot leave your house without reason, and if you think so, you should declare it on the paper, and so on. But now I repeat that we have quasi-state of emergency, because we have quarantine, we have restrictive measures, and for 2 days we have the responsibility for breaking them, and it's some kind of emergency, a state of emergency, but in some not unconstitutional, but not fully respond to constitutional way, because Constitution of Ukraine says that if you have some kind of epidemic, pandemia, you should pronounce state of emergency, and you do not have another options. And in Ukraine, president and government at all, they think that if we pronounce now this state, it will spread some panic in society. So they try to use this hybrid method
to keep the panic down, right? Well,
to keep the panic.
Let's pivot to a slightly different topic. The coronavirus bill wasn't the only thing that Parliament had considered during its emergency session this week. They also appointed a new Prosecutor General, Irina Venediktova, the former head of the State Bureau of Investigations, or the SBI. Ms. Venediktova was previously an MP for the ruling party, for the President's Party, the Servant of the People. And a lot of people are saying that this would preclude her from acting as an independent prosecutor. How accurate is this criticism? Is it right to be concerned about the independence of the Prosecutor General's office?
I fully agreed, because the question of independency is a key question about the Prosecutor General. Why it will be? Because the previous Prosecutor General, Rouslan Riaboshapka, was dismissed by the resolution of distrust of Parliament, and this resolution was mostly politically motivated. So it does not consist of some performance, some evaluation of his work, some professional lacks in his work. It was just about the lack of suspicion to previous President Petro Poroshenko and so on. So it was the inefficient investigation of political cases. So we understand that it's politically motivated resolution. And again, as the main reason was some kind of the president cannot be sure that the Rouslan Riaboshapka is 100% his guy, as he said to President Trump near half year before. So now they changed the Rouslan Riaboshapka to Irina Venediktova, who is maybe not 100 but 200% person of a president, because she is a member of his team, and she does not have any experience in criminal justice system. So previously, before she became a member of parliament, she worked as a scientist. She specialized in civil law, and that's all. So first of all, she does not have some specific expertise in criminal justice area, and the second one, she does not have experience to work on such high position which demand a lot of capability to be independent from such high person like a president. So in result, without this experience and to be the key member of president team, and she changes her position like to respond to the demand of president, the task of president. And in this situation, I also think that the chance that she will be independent is very low. And what is the result of this? That she will sign all the suspicions to Petro Poroshenko, Hladkovsky, and other political cases, and maybe we will have the chance to send them to prison, but it could be, and I think that it will be, that with such weak suspicions, with lack of evidences, they will have acquittal sentences, or these cases will be closed, and it will be a big strike to the reputation of Prosecutor General office and the Ukrainian government at all.
Eugene, let me chip in and ask, how damaging can Venediktova's appointment be for one of the most important, if not the most important cases in Ukraine, which is the Euromaidan case? Because previously, during her SBI days, she appointed Alexander Babiko, who's a former lawyer to fugitive President Viktor Yanukovych, as her deputy. And also, I believe she made some statements about the law on amnesty. How damaging can this be to the Euromaidan case?
Yes, it's a good question, because fortunately Babikov did not become a director of State's Bureau of Investigation. It was this position was held by another deputy of Venediktova, Mr. Sokolov, but still we have this problem that these cases are postponed de facto, and if previously we can hope that that Office of Prosecutor General can push these cases and to use their powers trying to influence on investigators of SBI and so on. Now we understand that in Prosecutor General Office will start some new attestation, new process of changes, and other processes of instability, and these cases will be postponed for undefined time. And about the law of amnesty, yeah, it's a great question, because in Ukraine it's still the problem that we have amnesty for all participants for Revolution of Dignity. And it's even not a question of some justice, of fairness. It is a question of legal consequences of the cancelling of this law. Because if we cancel this law, we cannot predict what will be to these people. So if we can open the criminal cases and then make guilty verdicts of court, they will be 100% appealed to European Court of Human Rights. And it's the same situation with any other amnesty cases, like amnesty by president and so on, because it's like one-time cases. Once you pronounce an amnesty, and you cannot change the situation because it is prohibition by the Constitution.
Now, so does this represent a kind of step back to the battle days of the Prosecutor General's office? I mean, for a long time in Ukraine, really up until Riaboshapka was chosen as the Prosecutor General, the prosecutor's office was seen as this kind of political repressive office. Does that mean we're going back to that time? And if so, what does that mean for the Zelensky reform project as a whole?
Well, yes, it's a big threat for Zelensky regime at all, because Riaboshapka was, from my point of view, really independent, and he tried to make this huge reform of prosecution. He started the attestation, he started to draft the criminal justice sector reform policy, and so on. But in the middle of process, he was dismissed from the position, and now again, as the first and the main demand to Prosecutor General Office is to prosecute the previous politicians, previous regime politicians like Poroshenko and his team, and it is a question for the old Zelensky team if the rule of law or some political power, some political prosecution, what is main for them. Because in Ukraine, maybe it is normal from the perspective of society. It is normal when Prosecutor General prosecute previous political politicians like opposition, but for our international partners, for another liberal democracies, Western liberal democracies, it's inappropriate, and of course the rule of law should be the first one. And this situation, when really independent Prosecutor General who started the reform, who was in the middle of reform, and he was dismissed and changed to another person, it is the first step when we see that for Zelensky, it is not the reform of prosecutor office is important, but for him is important who will be the Prosecutor General, and does he be able to sign the suspicion for the top politicians in Ukraine.
And what will happen to the reform? Will Mrs. Venediktova, will she continue it?
Well, we do not know, and she does not respond in some certain way about this. So as we see that on the regional level, it's still going the process of attestation, and I think that it will end it as was planned. But the next steps, like attestation of the local level prosecutors, will be stopped because Venediktova, she in some kind of opposition to Riaboshapka's reform, and she thinks that in nowadays prosecutors' office are working a good professionals, so they should continue to work without any attestation. And now it is not just a question about attestation, it's a question of the reducing the amount of prosecutors at all, because now it is de facto near 13,000, and they should be reduced by European standards to 10,000 prosecutors, and it is a question: do we make these changes? And all further steps like the coordination role of Prosecutor General of Office to another law enforcement agencies, question of the criminal justice sector reform policy, question of the qualification disciplinary commission of prosecutor, will it be returned or not, and if we will, in what way, and so on. So I repeat that Riaboshapka do not finish his reform, and it's not even the middle. Maybe it's just first third part of the reform. So it's just the start of the process. So we will see. I think that soon Irina Venediktova will share with us her view on the growing reforming of prosecutor's office in Ukraine.
Well, thanks for speaking with us, Eugene. That was Eugene Krapivin, a lawyer from the Center of Policy and Liberal Reform.
And that's it from our program guests. And we have a lot more of the coronavirus coverage on our website, en.hromadske.ua. But the coronavirus is not the only thing that's been making headlines in Ukraine and Eastern Europe this week. Now let's hear a recap from the region from this past week.
Pushback is growing against the Putin-backed constitutional amendment that would zero his terms in office and enable him to stay in power for 2 more terms, which could mean for life or at most until 2036. The opposition has now been protesting for about a week, but the authorities managed to rush the latest changes through with lightning speed regardless. The U.S. Embassy in Moldova has confirmed that oligarch Vlad Plahotniuc is currently in the United States, but that Washington is in the process of preparing his deportation to his home country, where he is wanted for corruption and money laundering. Plahotniuc and his Democratic Party were ousted from power in 2019 when an unlikely coalition of pro-European and pro-Russian parties arose to end his tenure as Moldova's most powerful man. The SARS-CoV-2 virus has swept across the entire European continent. Countries have taken drastic measures, including border closures and strict quarantines, in order to curb the spread of the COVID-19 disease. Russia, for instance, has decided to close its borders with Belarus on Monday, which drew criticism from Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, who said that Moscow's panic about the coronavirus is aggravating economic disruptions. As of March 20th, 26 cases have been registered in Ukraine, with 3 deaths and 1 recovery from the disease. Romanians will now face up to 15 years in prison if they violate measures imposed to contain the coronavirus pandemic, the government announced on Thursday. The harshest punishment will be imposed on those who know that they have the disease and flout the rules, if someone gets infected and dies as a result of their actions. Anyone failing to respect quarantine rules could face up to 3 years in prison, going up to 5 if their actions led to the infection of another person.
And we will be back next Friday offering an English-speaking look into the week's news from Ukraine and Eastern Europe. We are on Facebook, Twitter and YouTube. We are here to inform, but we also want to hear what you are thinking. Got a question? Tweet at us. I am Maria Romanenko.
And I'm Romeo Kukratsky.
And that's the week's news wrapped up. But that is not all from us. Hromadske provides news 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for over 5 years now. The media landscape in Ukraine is changing, and here's how to make sure that stories about Ukraine come from Ukraine.
I would like us to be heard, not only in Ukraine, but all over the world.
No bread for 3 months.
Not one, but look how many. There's bread here and there.
You are going against the God.
Of course, point number one.
Thanks for the invitation.
When will this all end?
The number of political prisoners has grown.